Today's episode of Bettor Thinking is one you will want to listen to. We've got Dr. Renee Miller joining us, and trust me, she's different from any guest we've had before. She's a neuroscience professor who's also deep in the fantasy sports world. This conversation gets into some really fascinating stuff about how our brains work when we're making betting decisions. Renee breaks down why we get so attached to our draft picks, why we keep mental blacklists of players who burned us, and why that rush you get while waiting for a bet to hit might actually be more powerful than winning itself. She's also dropping some exclusive info about this new fantasy football platform she's building. We're talking contracts, salary caps, the whole 9 yards, and it even lets you reserve college players before they hit the NFL. Whether you're betting a few bucks on DFS or going heavy in season-long leagues, this episode is going to help you understand why you make the decisions you do and hopefully make better ones going forward. Let's get started with Dr. Renee Miller. Renee Miller, how are you? Welcome to Bettor Thinking.
Great, John. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. This show, it was really geared towards bringing someone like you on, someone who has the multiple backgrounds. We brought on a lot of professors and authors and psychologists, just different people to give us a perspective on risk and some of the biases that we may have neurologically, psychologically. And having most of those people are not really involved in sports betting or fantasy sports or anything of the like. So they deal in risk maybe on a more broad scale. So having someone like you who both had neuroscience background and is heavily involved in fantasy sports, it's really the home run for our listeners. So I really appreciate you coming on and joining us for this bit.
I mean, I'm happy to. Yeah, I feel like a pretty unique person in both worlds.
You are
there
a unicorn.
Too many other professors that are doing as much fantasy work as I am too.
Exactly. So I kind of want to get into that a little bit. Which do you get involved in first? Were you always interested in fantasy, and then later on became an academic, or was it the other way around?
It takes a long time to become an academic, so no, that happened first. I did my undergraduate in neuroscience, and then got a PhD and postdoc, and it really wasn't. Sometime in that era, I started playing fantasy football, but it wasn't until I was a professor and teaching classes that I realized that there could be an intersection between the two. So no, neuroscience love came before fantasy sports love.
It did. Okay. So you got heavily involved there. And then how do you get involved in the fantasy sports? I mean, what triggers it for you? I assume it was football, because I think
it was football.
Geared. And just what got you involved? Was it a work league? Was it family? Was it just?
It was a family league. Oh, family and friends league. My brother got me involved with a league that I'm no longer part of, but is still going strong.
Are you too good? Are you too good for them? Are you too good for them now? Is that what the problem?
No, not at all. I never won that league all the years I played in it. So, nope.
Actually, that's actually something I wanted to touch on, and probably because my record is so bad. But in season-long leagues with some of my buddies, and you are a scientist, right? So we talk about sample size a lot. I really feel like in season-long leagues, unless you're playing in hundreds of them per year, which some crazy people do, if you're playing in 1 or 2 leagues, it's such a small sample size, even if over a 10-year period, to really test your hypothesis. Is that not right? Where daily fantasy, even in football, is only once a week, but daily fantasy, if you're playing basketball or baseball, you could kind of tinker with your model during the season and maybe get it right. Where what's 10 years of data? Really, it's not really much.
And the league is changing in parallel. So the model of 10 years ago for winning fantasy football is very different than the model from today or next year. And I think this past season that we had is pretty pivotal in showing that. And maybe it's a blip, and there are blips in the steady trend. But you're right about the sample size. It's so small, we can't really tell that. And definitely strategy has to be changing over time. So I don't know that it's even possible unless you're doing so many leagues over the course of a single season.
But even if you're doing a lot of leagues, you would have to kind of draft differently, different positions in the draft, different strategies in the draft. Otherwise, if you're doing the same thing in 100 drafts and you're drafting the same players in the same spots, you might as well have just had one draft.
Yeah. I write an article for The Athletic. I've done it the past 2 or 3 years, doing a mock draft that's kind of, I'm each manager, but we choose different strategies. Like, I'm going to only go with veterans. I'm going to go running back heavy. I'm going to do, zero running back. I'm going to do, elite quarterback, et cetera, et cetera. So you go through, and what does a draft look like if you really commit to one of these strategies in August or September? And then at the end of the season, which one of those rosters fared the best? And of course, it's a very imperfect exercise, but there are some pretty consistent trends, barring a lot of injuries and, certain teams that I did this with the last time got really decimated by injuries this year. So
Right.
It's not quite fair, but it's a really interesting exercise for me to go through. It supports kind of what I believe, which is that we should be doing a lot of introspection and evaluating decisions and trying to see what worked and why. In all aspects of life, but definitely in fantasy.
You literally just took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, we really need that in all aspects of life, right? Because there's I think with most of us, there's a lack of self-reflection and seeing, were we the reason? Did we make a mistake somewhere in our process? Or was it just the luck of the draw? We took the player that we wanted to take with our number one pick. He got hurt. It happens. We move on, as opposed to, I think most people try to go back in time and say, I was tossed. It was a toss up between these two guys, and I knew it was you always hear that one. I knew the other guy was going to go off. Like, I just knew it. And I went with that because so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so said it. And I really wanted to go with the other pick.
Yep. It's so interesting. Maybe we can get right into the neuroscience of it, but our brains are built to do exactly what you just said. It's a self-protective mechanism. It protects our ego, which is maybe our most precious asset in surviving this world. So those retrospective justifications and excuses are, almost impossible to really overcome. And certainly we can try, we can know that. There's names for these biases that force us to do that, in looking back at our mistakes and evaluating our decisions. But they're all there to protect our belief in ourselves. If we came to the conclusion, like, I'm just terrible at making decisions, and we accept that as the truth, then, well, maybe we don't play fantasy football anymore. But if in a broader aspect, that's not an attitude that you can walk around with and be successful in life. So
it
so our
seems
brains
difficult.
do a really good job of protecting it.
Right. I mean, it seems difficult for most people to be not just contrarian, but to be contrarian in the right situations, because I think we are, as you said, I think we're hardwired to really go with the crowd. I think that was probably the safest way for us to survive, is to kind of fit into our little tribe and not be the really oddball, different person with crazy ideas, because our chance of survival was a lot greater if we all combined with the same mindset and the same goal. Where you see, I think now, where it's maybe our decisions aren't as life and death as they may have been when we were hunter-gatherers. But when you look at decision making now, we'll see some of in a capitalist society, we'll see some of those who took these unbelievable risks, and those are the ones who are the billionaires now. But what we don't look at maybe are the ones who took those risks and, of course, are not doing so well, because there's probably an equal amount, if not more, of those people. But we always focus, we're like, what made that person successful? Oh, drop out of high school, start a business, right? Yeah, it worked really well for a group of people, but on the whole, does it really work well for all of us? I think we do that in our sports as well. We look at what worked last year, and we don't look at maybe the same exact strategy came in last place. It was just that person had the one player that you needed.
Right. How many 9-leg parlays lose before
Right.
the one that makes the news that turns $20 into $3 million, right? That's
Exactly. Yeah, we're so we're just so biased to go use the cognitive bias, but we just have that. And then the other thing when we were kind of just ties into what we started discussing, I see way too often. All right, I am a so-called, let's say I'm a betting expert, right? Now that doesn't mean that I know who's going to win the games. I'm just looking for an edge, right? So I'm looking for any small amount of edge. But of course, when I talk to my friends, family, they just want to know who's going to win the game, which I don't know any more than you do as to who's going to win the game. I just know that maybe the odds aren't where they should be. But what I see is when people ask me for advice, and I've seen it with other people, they are not really looking for advice. What they're looking for is for you to confirm whatever it is that they are thinking, because it just makes them feel better. Like, oh, John agrees with me, so that makes me feel even better about my pick. And they'll do that with fantasy, and they'll do that with sports betting. So, I mean, why is that? Why do we do that? Are you tired of chasing losses and following touts who disappear after a cold streak? Well, we've all been there. Burning money on bets that seem like locks, following so-called Twitter experts with fake records, and wondering if anyone actually makes money betting sports. Well, that's why we built the Sharp app, a premium sports betting intelligence platform that's helping our members consistently find edges and make more informed betting decisions every single day. Our Proptimizer is trusted by thousands of verified users in our Discord community who openly share and track their success. No hiding, no deleting tweets, just real results you can verify yourself in our active community. Sharp app gives you professional grade tools designed specifically for Prize Picks, Underdog, Sleeper, DraftKings Pick 6, No Vig, Parlay Play, Hot Streak, and Flip. Download the Sharp app today at sharp.app and use code Thinking35 for 35% off your subscription. That's sharp.app and code Thinking35. Stop gambling, start winning with the Sharp app.
That's called confirmation bias. We do it all the time, and it's another ego protecting trip, but it also has the built-in benefit of if John's wrong, then you can blame John. Even though you could scan headlines and search, in your search results, you could get 3 people that say the Bills are going to make it to the Super Bowl, and 3 people that say the Bills aren't going to make it to the Super Bowl, and you're going to bet on the Bills because that's what you want to do, but it's because you've only listened to the advice of the people that agreed with you and didn't really take into account the differing opinion or the consenting opinion and look at the rationale behind that stance and really say, wow, maybe these guys are onto something. They're using similar stats, similar data to arrive at a totally different conclusion. And why is that less valid than the first 3, So we let our emotions guide which data we choose to believe more or which facts we choose to weight more in our decision. I like to think about decisions as like a weighted equation where there's lots of different puzzle pieces and some of them are more important than others. And which ones you give credence to is going to guide your decision, and that's going to vary from individual to individual. So that's why our games are fun. That's why we keep playing them.
Yeah.
There's so much individual variation. There's no one solution.
Well, I was getting into board games like maybe 10 years ago. And after maybe not playing board games since I was a kid, and I was on these message boards and I'm reading, and they said, what made the most fun board game was that element of not just skill, but it had to have a luck element as well. Poker is probably the most perfect example of this because the most skillful players over time will win. But on any given day, anyone can beat the top poker player in the world if they're getting lucky and they're getting the cards. Not much you could do if your opponent just keeps getting really good cards against you. So it's what makes the game fun. Whereas chess, I'll never beat the top chess player in the world. It doesn't matter, how many times we play. They're going to beat me every single time. So I think that's, like you're saying, I think that's part of the allure of betting, gambling. But you have to have, don't we have to win every so often to keep it, to keep fueling the passion? Although I guess people don't win the lottery all that often, and they still come back for more.
So this is I think one of the most interesting topics in the field under the umbrella of what we're talking about, which is that people that gamble, bet, play fantasy, buy lottery tickets, whatever passion that is they're pursuing, winning doesn't actually matter. The thing that is creating the draw or the drive to play is the period of uncertainty, the possibility of winning. So whether it's between when you buy the lottery ticket and when the numbers are announced, or when you place the bet and the game finishes, that's the allure. And that's true for casual bettors, casual fantasy players, as well as problem gambling, people with gambling addictions, sports betting addictions, or even fantasy sports addictions. It's that middle, it's the unknown, that where anything is possible. And that's the one that drives the reward pathway in your brain, and causes that dopamine spike. Winning is actually not as enjoyable. Another area where I hear a similar thing, that another thing I'm passionate about, is travel. And a lot of people will say that it's the planning of the travel, the vacation, and the lead up to the trip that brings us the most joy, the biggest dopamine rush. Then when you actually go on the trip, it's rushed and it's chaotic, and you're going from thing to thing, and not really taking the time to enjoy mindfully where you are and what you're doing. So it's a similar kind of phenomenon, where it's the anticipation.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that with travel, but that's really, I think it's across the board with goals in life. If you've got some sort of a goal, something that you're working towards, it always feels better as you're achieving that next step. And then the moment that you've achieved whatever it is, suddenly it all goes away, or at least maybe most of it goes away. I mean, if you're trying to lose weight, every time you step on that scale and you're like, oh, dropped 1.5 pounds, dropped 2 pounds, like, it gives you that motivation to keep on going. And if you're going the other way, of course, it deters you. It's just it's fascinating. But I think in life in general, I think that's a good. I guess that's the reason why they say writing down your goals and having a goal, having something to aim at, a target, is so important in achieving them.
Yeah. I think it can also lead to some, I don't want to use too strong of a word here, but maybe even a pathological progression. If I take a really kind of maybe a weird aside, the motto of my university is a Latin word, meliora, which means ever better, which sounds good at the beginning when you think, like, yeah, we're always striving to be better teachers, better scientists, better people. But there has been an introduction of a counter voice in that, where they say it's toxic meliora, where continuously striving, always setting a new goal, a higher goal, can be detrimental to physical and mental health, depending on the domain, where you're never satisfied with what you've achieved. You're never satisfied with where you are. You're always trying to be bigger, better, stronger, faster, smarter. And I think we can get into that a little bit with sports betting too, that even when you win the bet, do you savor it? Do you enjoy it? Or are you already thinking, how are you going to reinvest that money? How are you going to, what's next?
Yeah. Well, that's why everyone should play golf, because you never actually get, you can never get to that level. Yeah. Tiger Woods was changing his swing in the middle of the most historic run of all time. So that'll keep your feet on the ground. But yeah, I do want to get into that with you talk about with betting, the win isn't necessarily that's not giving you the same feeling as maybe the anticipation of the bet, but also losing seems to hurt us a lot greater than winning wins. I've heard so many coaches have talked about this on prior podcasts. you've heard coaches where they say they retire, and what is the reason that they're getting out of coaching? It's not because it's not the demand of the job. It's what the losses are doing to them physically and mentally. It's never about the wins. It seems like losses will weigh on us a whole lot heavier. So if I lose $100, that's going to annoy me way more than if I just won $100. You're like, all right, won $100, but oh man, I dropped $100 for stupid reason. I bet on that stupid thing, right?
You know what the antidote is that is place another bet. So you're not dwelling in the loss. You're living in the anticipation. So yeah, that is human nature, really. And lots of studies show in decision making that we will make decisions to avoid losses more than to achieve rewards. So in all kinds of, there's semi-artificial decision making tasks that you can have people do in a lab setting, and maybe you're recording brain activity while you're doing it. People will consistently make lower risk decisions for lower rewards rather than risk losing what they've gained. One of these, I don't know how into this your audience is, but one of them is the Iowa card sorting task. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we love all this. We love all. I love all the data and the science and all these studies. So yeah, by all means, go into them.
Yeah. So they give people like 4 different decks of cards, and they tell you, they tell you to choose cards and try to maximize your profits. So each deck, you can choose from any deck you want in any order, and you kind of have to learn which decks offer which possibilities. And then a person's behavior should gradually shift toward the deck that earns them the highest chance at rewards. So some decks might have cards that are plus 100, but minus 500. And other decks might have plus 10, but only minus 5. So you can kind of see, it's almost like a personality test, like how risk averse or how uninhibited a person is by how they judge the quality of the deck. It can also diagnose some pathological conditions, some mental disorders in which, an appropriate risk assessment is missing.
Well, that's it. Would that be sociopathic? Like people who don't have that ability to understand the risk? Is that sociopathy?
It can, but it doesn't have to be that level of that strong of diagnosis. Yeah. And again, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm a basic scientist. So
I've talked about this numerous times, but I had heard an interview years ago with I believe was a clinical psychologist in the trading realm on the stock market, and she was saying how a sociopathic mindset made for the best trader because they were able to disconnect themselves from the actual money being involved here. So I would assume that's some sort of that. We don't need to become sociopaths, but we somehow need to, while maintaining proper bankroll management and not getting ourselves, not putting ourselves in a detrimental situation. I think somehow, is there a way that we could train ourselves to be better at that, to be better at disconnecting?
I don't know. So there's definitely a spectrum of how emotionally driven your decision making is in humans, and some evidence shows that if you can influence people's performance on these kind of tasks by telling them like what they're most likely to do or what they should avoid doing. So we can be trained a little bit, but I don't know how task specific that is and how much it could generalize to other aspects of life, including sports betting and fantasy. Being aware that these tendencies exist, or that, a lot of people don't realize when they're making a decision that it's biased or that it's emotionally driven, or that they're just, scrolling headlines or posts on X to see what they want to see what they're looking for. people don't realize they're doing that. So in some sense, just being aware that our brains are cheating us most of the time, if we're not constantly checking in with them, can help. If it's just always in the back of your mind thinking, why am I weighting this information the way that I am? And is there another opinion? Is there another voice that I could listen to? And then, maybe arrive at a slower, more logical, rational decision.
So do you think that some of us out there, and I think this is for a lot of the fantasy people, and people certainly who are going to watch these type of podcasts, or those that are into it, and they probably fall into the trap of maybe getting too much information, like it's information overload at some point.
Yeah, and too much information is also shown to be a bad thing. I don't know if are you familiar? This is going back decades. There was a study done by a doctoral student, maybe in statistics, but he used horse racing as a model for how he was going to show this information bias. And so he took a bunch of people who were, self-proclaimed expert horse bettors, odds makers, and gave them data about the horses, about the weather, about the track, and varied the number of pieces of data that he gave different groups. So some people only knew like 3 things, and other people knew 10 things, and other people knew 30 things about the race. And then they had to handicap it. But, how are they going to set the odds? And so the outcome was basically they all were equally good at handicapping, but they differed dramatically in how confident they were about their decision. So the more pieces of information they had, confidence rose to like 90%, but the accuracy didn't change at all. So whether you had 3 pieces of information or 30 pieces of information, the result was basically the same, but the confidence increased. So what does that translate to? Well, if you're 90% confident, you might bet more money, even though that's kind of a false confidence. There's no, those additional pieces of information didn't improve your accuracy at all. So I think information overload is a real danger. And I see this a lot in fantasy football where people are citing stats that might be true. It might be very true that, if Patrick Mahomes wears blue socks in Tuesday practice, that he, only throws 1 touchdown in Sunday's game. But is that a piece of information that is relevant to betting on the over of, 1.5 Patrick Mahomes touchdowns? So you get, that's a silly example, but people do get really in the weeds searching for these obscure pieces of data that support an argument for one thing or the other, but the over, but the under, and they're not all important.
Right. And again, I think it goes back to what we said. That's when they come to me and say, John, what do you like? Do you like the total on this game? And they're hoping that I just agree with they like this game to go under or whatever the reason is. And they're going to wind up betting it. They may just bet more if I say, oh, yeah, I like that side too. And maybe they're going to bet less, but they're going to bet it one way or another. So we're just always looking to be for that affirmation from someone else. But now, how do we balance that? Because wisdom of the crowds is so important. And when we're talking about fantasy, fantasy sports, for daily, not daily fantasy, but season-long fantasies, we have ADP, and that to me is the ultimate in wisdom of the crowds. Now, I'm the firm believer when we're looking at fantasy that really almost everything you have is baked into the ADP. You don't need a whole lot of projections and whatnot. You could kind of look at ADP and then maybe adjust off of there, just because all the information is baked in from the market. I don't know, if you agree with that logic or not, but I try to separate myself from overload of information.
Yeah. It comes up a lot. So I write about, I don't do projections or anything like that for individual players, but I do write the column for the Survivor league for the Athletic, and so you have to pick the team that's going to win. And we run into stuff there where, if you start with the betting line, the spread, so much is already baked into that to that spread, that counting that as one piece of information, and then also counting home field advantage, and then also counting team record, and then also counting star player, it dilutes, or it's a case where it raises the confidence without necessarily changing the accuracy. So I agree that, people are looking for reasons to do what they want to do.
Yes. I tell you, I am so happy.
You know what you want to do, and you just want confirmation.
I'm just so happy you said that, because with Survivor, I actually do a podcast strictly for Survivor pools, and the most flack I get is when I say don't try to handicap the games. It's built into the line. That 72% of the time this team is going to win based on the market, and then they say, yeah, but that team's on the road, and I'm like, well, that's all taken into account by the point spread, and I've showed this to them statistically, where road favorites of 7 points win just as often as home favorites of 7 points. Divisional favorites of 7 points win just as much as non-divisional games of 7 points. So, I tell people, if it makes you feel better and it's a coin flip between two teams and you want to go with the home team over the way, by all means, go for it. But it should not be the overriding factor in your decision-making. Why not just narrow it down? This betting market is the most liquid in the world in sports. Why not utilize all the information that's in there and stop trying to drive yourself crazy looking at who the starting cornerback is, So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
But it's now we're talking about fantasy football. We've got fantasy baseball coming in. I think a lot of these concepts, kind of carry over to all the season long fantasy and drafting. And I've heard, and you're a proponent of tiering, right? And now why does tiering, what is tiering when you're drafting, and why would that help you in some of the things that we're talking about?
I think one of the reasons tiering is helpful is to avoid what can happen in a draft, like FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So if you have a clear, I'll just use quarterbacks or starting pitchers because they stand alone. If you have a clear system of, these guys are tier 1 that I'm willing to draft in rounds 1 or 2. These guys are tier 2 that I'm willing to draft in rounds 3 or 4 or 5. And it gets to be your turn in the draft and it's round 2 and none of those guys are available. You don't go to tier 2. You go to a different position. So that's the value for me in having the tiers, is so that you don't get into, oh my God, all the good quarterbacks are gone. I better just grab the next available quarterback because the next time I draft, there won't be any quarterbacks. That's not true. And it can force you to take a player who doesn't belong in the early round just because everyone else is doing it. And it's not everyone else. It's 3 other people took the 3 best quarterbacks. Okay, so take the best wide receiver, So that's the value for me, is that it creates a system of rules that you accept. You made the rule, and said, this is not a player that deserves to be taken in this round, and so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to fall prey to that fear-induced emotional decision. I'm going to take the best tier 1 wide receiver or running that's available.
Right. So I think that's a good lesson for everybody when they're doing it. I think it helps you just not get locked in on that one player. Maybe there's the elite players who get drafted 1, 2, 3, and they're in their own tier. But, if you have that draft pick, you're going to take that player. But this kind of comes into play as you're getting into round 2 and 3, like you're saying. If you've got 5 starting pitchers, just because one pitcher is projected for 165 strikeouts and the other pitcher is projected for 155 strikeouts, I mean, that's, it's just not that big of a difference. Where if we're tiering them, you almost don't even want to put a name on them, but I think mentally you'll get to that point if you start doing that, where you're not going to look at the name. You're going to just look at that tier. Like you said, this is my tier 2 pitchers. I don't really care which one I get. If one of my tier 2 pitchers are here at this spot, I'm going to take whoever I think's the best one. I'll make the decision from there. But I think it's a good way to go about it, as opposed to having particular, I have to get this player. You're like, I think it's so much easier to say, I have to get a tier 2 pitcher here, hopefully, not I have to get such and such.
Yeah. And with your bats too, it gives you some flexibility. Instead of saying I have to have this particular second baseman, you can say, oh, look, I've already accumulated 2 outfielders from this team. If I want to build a stack, this guy gets a lot of steals. This is probably the tier 2 second baseman that I want, because it matches what I've already built, even if that player is ranked 3 places higher or lower than a different one.
It also goes into, I think you have to have some flexibility coming into a draft in all these different sports, because maybe you've done a bunch of mock drafts and then you get into your live draft and it doesn't go anywhere near what the mock draft went, because like these mock drafts are going to kind of go on the averages, and again, this is statistics. You get into your draft and you've got two people who are fans of a certain team, and they push they take their guy earlier than he normally would have went, and it totally turns your draft topsy-turvy if you're not anticipating it. Or football, everyone goes with the no running back, and that was your game plan too, and now you're drafting, you went in with the intent of going no, and you're like, well, there's going to be value if you go counter to what the consensus is in your pool. So I think practicing against different strategies. If everyone at the game is playing different strategies, then maybe you're going to try your strategy may be the best one. But if 10 of the 12 are playing the same strategy, it may not be that easy to draft against that, and you're going to have to change.
Right. Yeah, and planning to be flexible is a hard skill to have. And again, there's a wide range of where do we start on this. Some people are very amenable to going with the flow, and others are really disturbed when plans change, or things fall through, or and it's true whether it's a bad storm that's creating a travel delay, or an event that you've been planning for and looking forward to getting canceled, or some people just deal with that disruption, that unexpected chaos better than others. And so that's another thing, that just knowing that and being able to know how you are going into the draft, and saying like, I know that I might need to practice flexibility here. I know that not everything is going to go the way I planned. And I'm going to be okay with that. Can just set you up for more success than assuming everything is going to go correctly. This is a personal one for me, because I assume everything's going to go perfectly. I'm a really good planner. I've done all the legwork. There's no reason things shouldn't go the way I expect and want. So this is one that I practice a lot, is going with the flow and planning to be flexible.
Yeah, well, it goes back to also giving you the out when things don't go. You're like, well, Bob was a moron. He was drafting before me, and like he kept screwing up. Like he was screwing up my draft. Like it gives you the ability to pass blame onto someone else, which I think a lot of us like to do in life in general. But when we're talking about the fantasy leagues and auction leagues, you had sent me a link. You've got a new. Is it a new website, new service that's going on with fantasy leagues? Tell me a little bit about it before I kind of butcher what you've got going on.
Yeah, so this is a new one for me. This is me completely stepping out of my comfort zone and taking on a business venture with a group from MIT that formed a company called Scope Labs. They are based in New York City. They build incubator companies, and one of these incubator companies is a fantasy app called Franchise League Football. So they invited me on as the founding CEO of Franchise League Football. And we're in the process of building an app that will support a contract-based keeper league fantasy world. So it's taking, everything I love about making decisions in fantasy sports and making those decisions a lot harder when you bring in money and contracts and salary cap and a whole bunch of other features. So the website is up. It is franchiseleaguefootball.com. You can sign up to be on the wait list and read more about all the features that our game will have. And we expect the app to be available for download pretty close around the NFL draft at the end of April. So there won't be a draft. There will be when you sign up, you buy a franchise. So you get a fully loaded team. The players have contracts. Some of them are good. Some of them are bad. Some of them are expiring. Some of them are for the next 4 years. So you have to decide from this team that you bought, which players are you going to keep? Which are you going to cut? Everybody that gets cut gets put into a free agent or a restricted free agent pool that then goes to auction. So then, later in the summer, there's an auction. All the rookies that have recently been, added to the league are part of that auction. And you bid for the best contract. The player's going to go to the team with the best contract. So, if it's $20 million for 4 years, that's a better offer than, $18 million for 2 years. So you really get into how do you value players, not just for one season, but how are you building a dynasty? And we think this game really appeals to people who think they're good at fantasy football and want to take it to the next level. And we've also created some features that, for me, just make the game a little bit less fluky, less lucky. So we're going to have the ability to sub in bench player for an injured starter. So if your running back gets hurt in the first half and is out of the game, if you have a running back, or if they're in a flex spot, any flex player that could fill in for the second half, you can get that player's stats for the second half. So injuries no longer have to determine fantasy matchups.
Now, it has to be an injury? It can't just be that the player didn't get any targets and you started them. It has to be an injury.
Yep. Because the player that doesn't get any targets in the NFL game is still in the NFL game.
Right.
I mean, they're still playing. So that, okay, that doesn't count. But a real NFL team, if their running back gets hurt, they don't just not use a running back for the rest of the game, right? They put in a backup.
So now, well, that adds just more strategy involved as far as having your bench. You want to always at least have one bench spot that's going to be playing, if possible, with bye weeks and whatnot. So that's an interesting wrinkle. I do like that, and it does eliminate a lot of the that first quarter. Your quarterback gets hurt, and that pretty much kills your team for that week. So let me understand. So now I'm going to be playing against. So I'll be playing against other people, like people that I don't know. This is not necessarily. Can I have a league with my friends, or can I do that?
You can. Yep. You can start a new league with your friends. You can port over your former league, your ESPN league, with your friends, and it'll include all the teams, the team names, the league history can all port into this format. Or you can join a public league, or you can join as an individual. You can say, you know what, three of my friends are into this, and we're going to start a league, but we can't fill out 12 or 10 places. So there's a league matching option where you can join as an individual and be assigned to a public league with strangers. You can do that as many times as you want. So a little bit of both. Yeah, we want people to be able to play with their existing league mates in this new format, but also maybe be open to meeting some new people that are interested in playing a competitive, more strategic version of the game.
Well, I think the more layers you add, as long as it's done properly, but the more you, certainly the shallower or the deeper the league, I should say, right? So if you have more roster spots, and you coordinate the league in such a way to make it less luck. I play in a lot of deeper leagues, And if you play in a shallow league, there's almost like there's one player drafted every year who's going to win 60% of those leagues, because like if you just didn't have that player, it was almost impossible to win. And I like playing in the leagues where it's not dictated by one player. So if you have a larger roster size, maybe more starting positions, whatever the case may be, to try to eliminate some of that luck. And I think so here, obviously, if you're putting, we're going to have contracts. This is going to be a keeper type of league. Now, is there a penalty if I put a 3-year contract on somebody and, after this year just has a terrible season, I don't think they're worth what I pay them for the years 2 and 3? Is there some sort of a penalty if I get rid of that player?
They're under contract, so they're yours.
So there's no cutting the player.
The
so
penalty
you're stuck.
So at the end of every season, you will have the option to cut a certain number of players. You have to keep. So if we have a 14-person roster, you have to keep between 6 and 9 players. So if that player if you choose to cut that player, they go back into the free agent pool.
Okay.
But and I mean, yes, you could drop them during the regular season. This is the strategy. Who are they that they're underperforming, and is it worth dropping them completely? And somebody else can pick them up for the minimum.
So is that what happens?
No,
so if I have someone
answer.
if I have someone under contract and I drop them and someone else picks them up, they're picking them up at whatever the min price is? So everyone who gets picked up at a min price for your
and then those contracts are evaluated in the if they're on a contract, that you pick them up at their contract price, but during the season it doesn't count against your salary cap. And then the following season their salary will be reevaluated.
Okay, so if I pick up a player who's under salary, that's not going to affect my salary cap. So the salary cap is basically your drafting. Is that basically a drafting cap? And there's no cap during the season. And
right. So some of it's going to be inherited, and some of it's going to be determined at the auction.
Got it. Is it fab? So to pick up a player, it's an auction as far as picking up players?
It's always going to be auction format, blind bidding to pick up players. So you have an in-season budget as well.
So that's a separate budget
as the overall salary.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, those leagues are. I think they're fun, and I love that aspect. I'm in a league like this. I've very similar. That's why I'm asking some detailed questions, because we've been doing this league for a few years, and I will give some people advice that I'm almost confident will translate to what you've got going on, and that is, more often than not, the long-term contracts don't work out as well as you think, and it kind of handcuffs some people. So you want to be careful. At least I've noticed in my league, where we do penalize if you're stuck with if you get stuck in a bad contract. There's some sort of a penalty depending on when you drop the player. But I think more often than not, when I look at I do the analysis from the previous year and I look at the long-term deals, very few of them does the player actually live up to the contract. It's interesting. Unless they were signed so low. What was that? I'm sorry.
Right. Some certainly will exceed their contract value too.
Yes.
So that's where we're starting. We're starting with some people who are, you're going to inherit some contracts that are good and some that are bad. And one of the other interesting things we have is it's not an auction, but more like a snake draft, 1 round, where you can reserve a college player. So you'll be able to have a college reserve spot, and then it just means you have first dibs on that player when they declare for the NFL draft, and you'll get them at the minimum rookie contract. So that's kind of a interesting way to bring in some interesting college football and really be thinking about building for the future.
Yeah, it's going to be
depending which college player you get.
You're going to get plenty of fantasy football nerds are going to love this stuff. Yeah. Whenever you could add in something different, I like that with the college players, because a lot of people don't do that. Yeah, that just because I think it goes back to we so badly. I think fantasy sports we mostly play with our friends and family, and typically it's not for a lot of money. It's about wanting to be right and wanting to win. So when you give someone that hey, I'm going to take the college guy, and when that player goes off, you could just tell everybody how smart you were about that player. But that's also leads us to some sort of there's biases there as well where we get so hooked on a player because that's the player we saw at 18 years old and said that was going to be the guy. And we have a much harder time, I would think, to drop that player and give up on that player than someone else would.
For sure. Then that's not limited to college players. That's limited to our early draft round picks, right? That's our, we get attached. Once we make a decision, it reflects kind of our ego, who we are, and we get attached to it, and we value that much higher than we did before we were making the decision. We can very quickly go from a 50-50 choice to a 99%, this is my guy. And it's called the endowment effect. We do it with all stuff, not just fantasy players.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes us hard to admit when we're wrong and part ways.
Yeah, I'm sure it comes into play just in real life sports as well, where if you had a general manager, that's my draft pick guy, I drafted that quarterback. I'm going to give him as long a leash as I can because I'm attached to that player. So I think that's why when you see in all sorts of organizations, when new people come in and cuts are made and people, it's so much easier when I don't have a personal connection to the staff. There's a bar that a bar by me, and they renovated. New owners came in, renovated the bar, and when it was finally renovated, I went back in there, and it was all different staff. So I was asking the bartender, about the old bartenders, and she said no, this owner, he owns a bunch of bars, and what he likes to do is come in and then just bring in his own staff. So I think I think we probably see that in all aspects where people like to have their people, the people that they trust, or just we get that emotional connection. And certainly in sport, but it happens on the flip side as well. This is actually something I wanted to bring up with you, where I see it in prop betting, and you'll see it in fantasy for sure. A player does you wrong, so you think, this player, you had his over in points in the NBA, and he misses his last 5 wide open shots, and you're like, that is it. That player's done. I will never bet on that player again, which just makes absolutely no sense. But I see people on Twitter all the time. They're like, add that guy to my list, add that team to the list. I'll never bet that team. I'll never bet that player. Just doesn't seem very logical. But people do this, both sides.
It's so satisfying.
It's your way of publicly being able to say, screw you. I don't want to, I'm not betting you because
dead to me.
Somehow Steph Curry
the
cares.
Dead to me list.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that player's dead to me. But we do it in fantasy, just in season long. I mean, all the time. They're like, I drafted that guy second round, and I wanted to draft the other. Again, it goes back to I was between 2 players. I wanted to draft the other one. I didn't. That guy went off. My player did nothing. He's dead to me. And instead of putting a value on that player, like, okay, he was a 2nd round pick this year. Maybe he dropped down to a 6th round pick, and maybe everyone else has that same mindset you do. And now when in the 7th round, you're like, oh, well, geez, now it's pretty good value. We have to look at value in fantasy sports, in betting, in life. I mean, if you look at, there's a lot, you look at a business, you're like, if you just look at the business and say, oh, that place, the building's falling apart, everything's falling apart, I would never buy that. Well, you didn't hear the price yet. Like, at some price, this player might be worth it. This game, I might be willing to make this bet at some price, even though it looks like a terrible bet if you don't give me a price. Because I think we go under the assumption everything's a 50-50 until we actually get the price on it.
Yep. There's 2 things that are relevant there. One of them is fear again. So even at that price, can you stand being burned a second time by that player, by that bet? And the other is that we play these games and have these hobbies, if betting is a hobby, to have fun. So if you'll have more fun not having that player on your team and continuing to hate on that player because they wronged you, then do it. Like, have the fun. I always try to say we can, manage our decision making and, try to do our best. But at the end of the day, these are hobbies, these are fun. And to the extent that, money is involved, we care, of course. But I try to not advise people to do things that will limit their enjoyment of the game. And that this falls in that category. Like we all have those never again players. So if you're going to be miserable, don't do it.
My mother is an avid fantasy football player, right? And to the point of annoyance because we the football season, like, luckily she lives by my brother, so he gets the brunt of it. But she is. It's great to have her because everything she says, she is the model for the average fantasy player. She gets she gets frustrated with her players. She's got ridiculous hypotheses that like she won't play her players on Thursday night games because she just believes Thursday nights they're tired and they're not going to perform. And then when her player scores 40, I'm like, listen, you don't sit Justin Jefferson on a Thursday just because it's a Thursday. And she's, she does all that wacky. So she's like, do I play Derrick Henry? I'm like, yes, you play Derrick Henry every week. I don't care who he's playing against. She's one of those, like, I'm looking for the matchup. Again, it goes back to the more information than you possibly need. You're like, these are your best players. You play them every week, and you don't overanalyze it. Yeah, don't overanalyze what you're doing. So, but yeah, my mom is, and she wins her leagues, which is fascinating. More often than I do. But I think that is interesting in sports betting, in fantasy. You touched on the money aspect, and I really think that's where things change. And that numbers is different for everyone, right? If I'm drafting in a $50 league, I'm very loosey goosey. I'm speaking to the average person. Maybe I'll take. You know what? I'm going to take a flyer on this guy. As the guy I was thinking about, I'm going to take him a round earlier than I normally would have. You get up to like a $500 league or a $1,000 league. Now, all of a sudden, you're not willing to take the same chance. But at the end of the day, the proper way to play is the proper way to play. Like, no matter what that number is, I think, one, can we get ourselves accustomed to a higher limit? And maybe the answer is not get accustomed to the higher limit, is maybe figuring out where that point is for you, where you start to change your decision making, maybe for the worse, when you get to that limit, and maybe stay below that limit where it changes your mindset.
Yeah, well, I think the tier system works here too. So if you have this dead to me list, there's going to be other players in that tier that are statistically equivalent, projection equivalent, that you can pivot to and still have fun. How to set the limit of when you're going to be serious it's totally personal. I can't advise anybody on that. But if you're not, let's say you're not being serious, you call it loosey-goosey, you're testing a hypothesis there. You're taking a chance. You have a reason why you're going to take that player around early. It's because you think he's going to do something that other people don't think he's going to do. So it's not, taking a kicker in the first round because we're only playing for $10. It's, you're taking calculated risks in that situation that you think will be really fun if they work out. At least I do. At least that's how I approach it, whether it's, with my $3 daily fantasy lineup or in the league I play with my students that where no money is involved. You're taking these calculated risks that go a little bit against the grain because you think it's going to either be fun or be profitable. And if it isn't, it's not costly. So that's at least how I approach the difference between playing seriously and not. But I take risks in my serious leagues too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I mean, some people do, some people don't. I just see it in all aspects. I see it in I've coached baseball. The bigger the game gets, when I go watch coaches, the less risk they're apt to take, and it happens in pro sports as well. We're not as likely to steal second base because you know what, you're not. I don't think
Go
you're
for it on fourth
cognitively think.
down. Yeah.
You're right. The going for it on the fourth down, like until it becomes ingrained in it's part of the culture, like the Lions, where he's just going to go for it maybe too many times, but that's his mindset. Where if it's not something that you're used to doing, it's going to be real hard for you in the biggest game of your season to go ahead and make what could potentially be the proper play from the analytics, but it's just not in your DNA. You're not that type. Todd Bowles on Monday night this year against the Chiefs has the Chiefs beat if he goes for, if they could convert a 2-point conversion, wins that game on Monday Night Football. It was either Monday or the Sunday night game, and decides, you know what, let's just go to overtime and see what our chances are in overtime. Where, I live down in Tampa, so I hear about this one a lot. But it just doesn't make any sense. But he's not a coach that's really into taking a whole lot of risks. So you see that in coaching, you see that in all sorts of things, and I think at some point people have to, especially when you're betting and you're taking risk, I think it's important to know what your personality is. And again, it goes back to the self-reflection, because if you're the type of person who is, who needs to win, you need to have some wins, like you can't handle having 2, 3, 4 weeks of losing, then you're not going to want to be the person that's playing the 9 and 10 leg parlays that are just very rarely going to win, because after 3 days you're going to be like, well, screw this, right? So this is not fitting to my personality, where you have to kind of fit. If you're someone who can totally handle that, then playing those parlays may not be a terrible play. Let's just go into the assumption here we're all taking plus EV type of plays, but you can handle that. When you play daily fantasy sports, I'm a GPP player. Most people can't handle the swings that come in GPP play, because I expect to lose every time I play, except on the rare occasions where I win 100,000, or I win, the very rare occasion you win $1 million. So I don't think most people can handle that mindset. So I think it's really important to understand yourself. Are you a cash game player? If you're playing poker, am I a cash game poker player, or am I going to play tournaments where I'm not going to win very much and my variance is going to be a lot higher? So I think that's one of the key lessons here that I think you talked about, that we could take away, is have some self-reflection, and then your style of play, whether it's fantasy or sports betting, needs to coincide with your personality
and your goals. What are you getting out of playing poker? Is it, when I play poker, it's the cost of entertainment. I fully expect to lose, and I have fun doing it, and that's the cost of my entertainment that night. So, and that can be the same with fantasy leagues, daily fantasy, and sports betting. Like, if I I also play ridiculous plus EV individual events and wildly unlikely parlays. And that's fun. Like, how many hours does that take for you to realize you've lost your $10?
Exactly.
Like, I can't even see a movie for $10. So the cost of entertainment and that period of maybe it could still happen is worth it. So
again,
yeah.
it
depends what your goals are.
It's
But
the
if you
anticipation of putting in that bet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
and
that
hopefully
feeling.
if you're betting to buy lunch tomorrow, hopefully you're not betting.
That's
Like, so
that's
what
exactly
are your goals?
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Matters.
Well, Renee, it was an absolute pleasure. I learned a ton, and I think everyone else here has as well. If you want to give out that website for the fantasy league again,
Yeah,
that you
for
guys
the
have
new
going.
game, franchiseleaguefootball.com. And you'll see me posting about it on X and other socials, and hopefully getting the word out and getting a whole community of, we have plans for a Discord, and really want it to be a strong community. We'll take suggestions, we'll answer questions. So it should be a lot of fun this summer.
I'm looking forward to it. I will join a league myself this year, and we'll drop a link if you are watching this on YouTube, or if you're on any one of the podcasting platforms out there. We'll have it in the description as well, a link there. So Renee, thank you again. Really, really appreciate it.
It was a great conversation. Thank you, John.
Alrighty. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this content.